You have to know what you're billing and why you're billing it. Okay. You need to submit supporting documentation. Supporting documentation is needed. That person on the other end that's processing the insurance claim, they're not a dentist. They're not understanding. They're just reading a description. So
Mhm.
if you can give as much information as you can to the insurance company or to that person that's reviewing the claim, you're going to increase your chances of getting that claim paid.
This is Growth in Dentistry, a dental intelligence podcast, where we ask the question, what does growth in dentistry mean to you? I'm Steve Jensen, a dated dental nerd, and your host. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Growth in Dentistry podcast. Super excited to have you back again today. For those that are new listeners, please go like and subscribe to the podcast. It makes a big difference in helping us get our voice out there to the dental industry. Now, I always give a big shout out right at the beginning to the marketing team at Dental Intelligence for sponsoring this podcast and for doing all of the production work behind the scenes. It's a ton of work, and I'm grateful for all of the things that they do to keep this podcast up and rolling for all of our awesome listeners. Now, as always, they have an offering for those that haven't checked out Dental Intelligence for a while, or maybe you've checked it out recently and you want to check it out again. We're always releasing new features like customized scorecards, insurance claims processing, insurance eligibility. We've added some new functionality into our payment software so you can send out payments requests out to patients and have those automatically right back into the practice management software. So if you haven't checked out Dental Intelligence for a while, go check it out. They are offering a $50 gift card just for doing a demo. Now, I'll leave that as it is, and I want to jump straight into our episode content for today. So today, I've got Kyle Summerford, and if you don't know his name, you might know his office manager group on Facebook. So Kyle started, and actually, Kyle, how long? I should have put this in my notes, but I did not put how long ago this was in my notes. How long ago did you start this Facebook group?
So I started in 2016.
Okay, so we're like 8 years, a little over 8 years in. So I'll tell you a little bit about this group. So it's called the Dental Office Managers Community on Facebook. And Kyle started it because he wanted to up-level himself as a business manager in dentistry. He, for context, has been running a periodontal practice and realized, I think things were going really well there, but realized, you know what, like there's always things to learn from people. There are always people that have great insights, even if things are going well or things are going poorly, and wanted to find a community. And here's what's especially impressive that I love about this group is it's not like 15,000 like random bots in India. These are like 15,000 actual like office managers, business managers, dental professionals that are in there constantly engaging. It's got really great a really great community with really I've been in there for the last couple of months just like reading comments kind of in the background, just kind of seeing what's going on because we've gotten more involved with Kyle and really impressed with the individuals that are in that group. Now, for context on this episode, so why bring Kyle on? One, Kyle has now 8 years of experience with this group and in his practice and has gained tons of experience and knowledge from doing that. I love people who are curious about dentistry and are always looking to grow. And two, in this process, Kyle has become really an expert in all things dental coding, as well as case acceptance. And those are two things that are super relevant today. So a couple trends I've noticed on the case acceptance side, the average practice, you've probably heard me say this before, is presenting more treatment than ever, but is actually getting less of that treatment accepted. So there's some things we could talk about there. And then the second thing is with financial pressures on practices, there are a lot of things in terms of like profitability where we might code something and it might not be the best thing. I was just in a dental practice a couple weeks ago down in Southern Utah, and I was doing a training with the hygiene team on like what I see in exceptional hygiene programs across the country. And we were talking about, hey, how can we get like 60% of our schedule to be D1110s, just like a classic prophy. We want to have like 30% be what's the word I'm looking for? SRPs, and we want 10% in perio maintenance. And some of these hygienists were like, there's no way. Like, we have tried to increase our perio game, but then we have these like battles with the front office and we're not giving them what they need, or we're giving them what they need, but then it's not going through and it's not getting accepted. And so there's this coding issue that's getting in the way of what's clinically really needed. And so I love Kyle's voice in this. So I'm going to shut my mouth for a little bit. Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Yes.
If anything about your background that you want to
Yeah,
share.
yes. Yeah, Steve, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate giving me the opportunity to come on here and just share more information on my background, I started in dental back in 2002, and um, I started out just, needing a job really. And over time, I was able to just learn more and grow. And, like you mentioned, I started this group as a platform to learn more and to connect with other office managers. You know, at the time I worked for a dental practice that, really didn't have a budget for me attending meetings and things like that.
Mm,
And so, the other thing is when I wasn't there, the practice didn't do so well financially speaking. So for the doctor to go out of their way to, really put up this money for me to go to attend a meeting, meant a loss of money to the practice,
mm,
even though, in my opinion, you're going to make that money back later because when you go to these meetings, you actually learn a lot and you're able to network and gain insights on, new things that are happening in dental that you need to know as a dental practice manager, right? Um, so yeah, so I started the group and really have learned a lot. Still till this day, I'm learning new things, some great, some amazing, some crazy, on a daily basis, And yeah, that so far, it's been a great experience, and we have a lot of great members there. Um, in terms of coding, right? So you mentioned perio coding.
yeah.
And yes, since 2014, I managed a perio practice, and I have also written a lot of articles on perio coding under the title "Dental Coding with Kyle." And one of the things with perio coding is it's consistently updated year by year. And so that's one of the challenges with insurance coding in general is that you really have to stay on top of these guidelines, and you have to really be like on top of your game to make sure that you're doing things, ethically and legally, right?
Mhm.
So that you don't get the doctor in trouble because, we're the ones that are processing or sending out these claims, but ultimately it's the doctor who's going to get, in trouble. So I've always made it a point and one of my top priorities to put real information out there, to help guide other office managers on things that I've learned and some of the education that I've taken in myself. And so that's one of my foundational reasons for existing in dental is
Mhm.
I feel like I need to share and give back to the community.
Now I'm going to ask this question, and I already kind of know one of the answers. The question is going to be like, so I'm listening, and I own a practice, or I'm an office manager or business manager, and I want to stay on top of the trends for coding. Like, what's the best way to do that? Obviously, I'm going to give a plug for your Facebook group. Like, go join that. It's
Yeah.
free, doesn't cost anything. Like, that's you kind of crowdsource it. Is there anything else that you're like, hey, this is a great place to go, a great resource? You mentioned you write a bunch of articles, so coding with Kyle.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have written many articles on perio coding and just general insurance coding in general, even not necessarily perio, but also, general dentistry, restorative dentistry, coding, even cosmetic dentistry, right? Even though sometimes it's not covered by insurance, but you still have to be able to understand what procedures you're entering into the computer and why. And so my articles have always focused on, the why,
Yeah.
because it's easy to get a code and just enter it into a computer, but you really have to understand why you're entering it into the computer in the first place, because you ultimately have to explain the procedures to patients as well, you know. So one of the things that I've always made sure to do in the articles I've written was explain in detail what the procedure is and how it's going to be performed. I
Mhm.
think that's something that's very important. In terms of other resources that are out there, yeah, the Facebook group is definitely one of them. There are other Facebook groups out there as well that have focused strictly on dental insurance coding. And then there's also, the ADA releases a coding book every year. That's something that's a good resource to reflect on. And there's just so much information out there.
And
If you
what's all
really,
in that book from the ADA? Is it like a lot of like technical speak? Is it easy to like
yeah,
go through and
yeah,
understand what I'm supposed to do with it? I'm assuming it's massive.
yeah. So that was the reason why I started writing those articles, was because when you read some of these manuals that are out there, it's really good information. Okay. And it's proposed in a way that's very technical, but it doesn't get to the nitty gritty of things that a front desk staff person or dental office manager needs to understand to have communications in the office with patients. If you're offering or if you're in charge of case presentation, right, in your practice, you have to really be able to explain to a patient how a procedure is going to be performed, because that patient is going to want to know, what are the post-op instructions? What, is there recovery time involved? And how can you convey those answers to the patient if you don't understand exactly how these procedures are being completed in the practice? So my articles have always focused on breaking down the procedure as if it's your first day as a dental office manager, or it's your first day in the practice as a front desk person. I always felt like there had to be, an easier way to explain these things. And that's what I tried to do. I still do it to this day. At least I hope so.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm like, as I'm listening to you, I don't know that I realized there was this gap between like, hey, here's this book with all these codes. Here's kind of some formal direction on what you can and can't be allowed and what's required in terms of like evidence to like submit this thing and have it go through. But there's this gap between that and actually getting that communicated to both everyone in the business, everyone in the dental practice, and the patients themselves. And so that's really cool that you're feeling that gap. And as you mentioned, I'm sure there are lots of other folks out there doing it, but it's a needed gap that needs to get filled. So, Kyle, why don't we go this way? Can you give us like, as you've been doing insurance billing, I mean, there's tons of places we could go in here, but do you have some kind of like your common mistakes that people make or common places where you're like, hey, these are easy places to improve if I'm an office manager, business manager, dentist looking to like level up in my coding behaviors? What are like the most common places to go and start looking?
Yeah. So, this leading back to the educational portion, right? So, the issues that I have seen, and I have been guilty of doing these myself, right? And that's why I'm able to kind of, deliver this information and say, don't do this, right? Because I've done it. I've done it countless times. And, one of the biggest things is that if you don't understand the procedure that the doctor is doing, it's very easy to miscode for it.
Hmm.
If you're not getting all the information and the doctor is documenting the chart, or adding the chart notes, if it's not being documented or you don't understand what is being documented, then you can't actually code for it properly, which is going to get you in trouble. That's one of the main um I'd say issue that I have seen or I have done myself in the past. And that's why education comes in. It's a very important part in order to code properly. The other issue that I've had is,
Well, let
we're,
me ask a question on that first one. So education wise, what kind of recommendation would you give? So I'm like an office manager, and it's like, okay, like I maybe like once or twice a year doing some coding education. Is that like a quarterly thing? Should I be doing something like every month just to kind of keep the brain sharp with it? Like how often
yeah.
are are you engaging with, coding education specifically?
Yes. So, in my Facebook group, in the Facebook group, I do offer insurance coding webinars. But I feel like, if you go online and you start reading about different procedures, um, if you stay familiar with it and you're consistently doing it in the practice, you're going to get better at it.
Yeah.
So, how often should you educate yourself? I don't know if there's an exact
Okay.
timeline for that. I think you should be doing it every single day. It's something that's repetitive, and you get better at it by being repetitive and refining your craft. The only way you're going to refine your craft is by learning and soaking in as much information as you can. You know.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that makes perfect sense. So you're doing it on a daily basis. So from that, you're learning, and then just like checking in with groups, watching some of those videos sometimes kind of as needed, or if you have like a minute, because I just am picturing like life of office managers can be just so busy. And so like prioritizing, okay, what am I going to focus on learning can be tough. Okay, sorry. I just wanted to ask the question. I'm like, okay, like what's realistic to start plugging into my schedule? Okay, sorry. Next one. You may have forgotten the second one, but first one you mentioned was just education is like one of the common things is we just don't take the time to go and learn
Right.
what the doctor is doing and making sure we understand the procedure so that we code it correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, the other issue that I've noticed with insurance coding is not understanding exactly how to get it covered by an insurance plan.
Mhm.
So, if you're billing a certain procedure and you're entering it into the computer, and you're relying the insurance company to come back and just say, "Hey, we're going to pay for it." The biggest issue is that you have to understand what supporting documentation is needed in order to get these procedures paid. If you're not understanding the supporting documentation that needs to be submitted along with these procedures, ultimately the insurance company is going to kick it back and say it's denied. Now
Mhm.
it's your job, right? And this is where education comes in. It's your job to say, okay, how can I get this procedure covered? What is it that I need to include? What is it that the insurance company is looking for specifically? And I'll give you an example. Periodontal charting needs to be within the last 6 months of the dated procedure. If you submit period charting from 7 months ago, insurance company is just going to kick back the claim. They're going to say it's denied. Are they going to explain it and walk you through the process? No, no way, because they don't want to pay in the first place. So, understanding what you're entering in the computer and what supporting documentation is very, very important. It's vital in order to get any claim paid.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, are there any like is Perio a good place to start in a general practice where it's like, hey, like that's a pretty common place where I mean, I see it in the sense that like we're looking at global data. ADA suggests that like what 40 or 50% of adult age 30 and over have some form of periodontal disease, but then when we look at like the average practice only has like 12% of their patients getting coded out some form of perio code, whether that's maintenance or SRPs. And so there's this kind of seeming gap in between what we're seeing in what's getting billed out and what the ADA is suggesting kind of actually exists. And I know for sure, like hygienists, when you talk with them, they're like, yeah, like I'm doing lots of like bloody prophies and stuff that like, is that a good place to start if I'm a general practice, or are there other places that you would suggest outside of hygiene where we could, start looking at specific codes and, what gets.
Yeah, yeah. So I would say, the thing is this, right? As a general dental practice, if you're consistently diagnosing perio and you feel that you can actually handle it in office, then it may be a disadvantage in terms of perio coding because your practice may not be familiar with proper coding for perio, right? And I've seen that in practices that I've consulted with because I have done some consulting in the past. And I've seen that where the general dental practice will take on perio procedures, and they'll start billing for them, and then they'll wonder why they're getting rejected.
Mm.
And so, it's a fine line. I don't think I would jump into that debate. But some general dental practices will take on perio and maintain it in office, and some general dental offices will refer them out to specialists.
So then there's that question of, is it worth our time to really get deep into perio coding in the general practice or not? So then maybe what are some other suggestions? If it's not perio, what kind of coding things are you constantly helping people with?
Yeah, so with perio, or sorry, in terms of like coding, typically the articles I've written, they cover a whole variety of procedures. And so I've gone into orthodontic coding, perio coding, coding for general dentistry, restorative procedures, crowns, fillings, you name it, I've written on it, and these all have to be updated yearly because there's new codes that are added, and these things are changing. It evolves every single year.
So I'd love to hear some like a couple of your like common, hey, here's a place where practices can often improve with their coding behavior. I would love to hear that. And then like what
Um,
impact is that going to have on the patients, on the care you're giving, on the business?
okay. Yeah. Okay. So, in terms of like, getting better at coding, right? And how does coding affect the practice overall? You need to be sure that, you're obviously entering procedures correctly because the practice is going to thrive and survive off of insurance payments. Some of these practices that are out there are very what we call insurance heavy.
Hmm.
And so, bringing up the whole healthcare hack that recently happened, some of the practices that were out there were struggling because there was no insurance payments coming in. But one of the ways you can make sure that you're actually doing the right thing is by understanding again what you're billing, because that's ultimately going to help the practice increase their revenue. Patients will, and I've had this happen where, patients will see something that was billed, and, they'll get upset and they'll contact your office, and, they'll say, "Hey, well, why was this billed to my insurance company?" And maybe that patient didn't have that exact procedure, and maybe that patient had something similar to that procedure. So you really have to make sure that you're submitting the code which pertains to the exact procedure that the doctor's completed.
Yeah, that's great. What else would you suggest? Like, what are the um when you're writing these articles, is it mostly just around like, hey, there's this update to the way we have to bill out, or the proof we have to give for these certain procedures? Is that most of the stuff that people need to kind of keep their ears out for, where it's like, hey, you now have to include this specific image or this type of description or explanation?
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the things with the insurance coding is, yeah, descriptions, right? So what I have done in the past is, I always explain the procedure above and beyond. So I include narratives, right?
Mhm.
And I include forms, right? Forms are a big component to getting procedures paid for by insurance companies. If you're not including narratives with your submission for some procedures, not all procedures require narratives, but the major ones typically do, and they help to facilitate the process of getting claims paid out. And some of the narratives, because I've also created narratives in the past where they were kind of standard narratives, and they really just outlined exactly what the insurance company is looking for.
Mhm.
There's certain terms, certain phrases, certain limitations, certain frequencies that exist, where the insurance companies are looking to kind of like, say, hey, well, we're not paying this claim. But if you can provide more information above than just a description of a procedure, and you can actually, again, this is where that supporting information comes in. You can actually send out narratives which will then help facilitate payment. So, if I was going to wrap this up, and I know I kind of bounced around all over the place, but if I was going to wrap this up, I'm going to say, you have to know what you're billing and why you're billing it. Okay. You need to submit supporting documentation. Supporting documentation is needed. That person on the other end that's processing the insurance claim, they're not a dentist. They're not understanding. They're just reading a description. So
Mhm.
if you can give as much information as you can to the insurance company or to that person that's reviewing the claim, you're going to increase your chances of getting that claim paid.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I like the way that you summarize. I mean, just keep it simple, you know? But, it sounds like maybe one of the problems that people have is they're just not they won't give as much of a narrative or explanation as is needed. Is there an element, and maybe this is like way off, but as I'm listening to you, is there an element of the person on the other side also doesn't want to like have to read everything? So if it's long, kind of like on a test where it's like if it's the longest, most like um the answer that gives the biggest explanation, it's like, that's probably the one that's the right answer. Do you know what I mean?
It could, it very well could be. throw the book at them, right? Throw the book and take all this, and then maybe they're just like, you know what? It seems like they know what they're talking about, so let's let's pay the claim.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, listen, it really comes down to more than the description. So, I could probably sit here on a podcast with you for a couple hours and really go through insurance and the breakdown of everything on why claims are not paid, why they should be paid, how do you get them paid. But the reality is that, you know, you have to understand what you're billing, why you're billing it. It really comes back to that educating, understanding what procedures are, why they're being done, providing the supporting documentation, showing why it's needed, explaining things further than just sending a claim. Sending a claim is easy. It's easy to enter a code.
Mhm.
Anyone could do it, you know? It's all of the information beyond that code which helps facilitate payment. That's what the insurance companies are looking for, you know? A claim can get sent, denied. Very easy. They kick it back, right? Now they buy themselves more time. We have to understand the business model of insurance companies, right? The business model of the insurance company, right, is to collect the premium and keep the premium, right? Because they're multi-billion dollar industries. So how do they make money? Well, they make money by generating money, not by paying claims, right? The more claims they pay out, the less money they have in their pockets. So insurance companies are not on our side as consumers or our patient side. And so I always play the patient advocate, and I sit there and I educate the patient and I say, hey, look, and this is where case presentation comes in. Um, where I combine the two. So I use the background that I have on dental insurance and I combine that and I use it to my advantage to help educate the patient so that they can feel comfortable and I could build credibility and trust with them. So what I do is I explain to them and I say, look, your insurance company, you know, is a business, okay? And although they're giving you $1,500, which is going to go rather quickly.
Mhm.
Um, they're giving you $1,500, but are they really giving you $1,500? How much did you have to pay monthly to get that $1,500? And now look, they're making reasons as to why they don't want to pay for the treatment you need.
Mhm.
So I create this is how I build credibility and trust with the patient. And I become a patient advocate for them. And they say, wow, okay, this guy is actually taking the time to one, educate me on a plan that I'm paying for. My insurance company did not even bother to do this. They
Mhm.
didn't do this. And I'm paying them monthly. So that's something that I've used in case presentation to really combine the two. And I found that it actually increases my patient acceptance by combining those two aspects into the case presentation process.
Yeah, which makes sense because then as a patient, you're helping them understand, okay, like here is why the insurance is going to pay what they're going to pay and why you're ultimately going to have to pay, the difference. And that makes that financial conversation seem like you're not the bad guy in any of this, right? If there is a bad guy to be had, it's not you, right? Because you've just like talked
Yeah.
them through the whole situation, which that makes sense logically.
Yeah.
Now, we're oh, go ahead, Kyle. You have one more thought?
Yeah, so I was gonna say, one of the things I like to do when the patient first comes into my office after seeing the dentist, and so I just want to mention that my presentation at Intellicon is going to take a deep dive into case presentation and patient
Cool.
acceptance. And some of the information I'm giving you right here is kind of what I'm going to be diving into at Intellicon. So I did want to mention that.
Cool.
But one thing I would love to share with the viewers, and this might be something that some of the viewers can actually start using right now in their practice, and that is when the patient comes in after seeing the dentist and sits down with me, and they come in, I say to them, the first thing I ask them is, are you clear on the treatment that you need and why you need it? Right? That's the questions I ask. And from there, I listen and then I decide where I'm going to go with the conversation next. Okay. At some point, we do get into the insurance portion. And my question to them is, do you understand your dental insurance? Are you familiar with your dental plan? And I'm going to tell you that I would love to say 10 out of 10 say no, they're not familiar. I'm going to say 9 out of 10
Yeah.
because that 10th person is going to tell me yes. And as soon as I start getting deeper into this is your annual maximum, do you
They
know
don't.
what that means? They don't know. They have
Yeah.
no clue. They have no clue. So why not integrate insurance discussions into your case presentation? And I found that that has helped me increase the patient acceptance rate.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now we're coming up on end of time. This we
Okay.
always ask this question at the end, and I want kind of a off the cuff answer. So the question we always ask Kyle to every single guest is, what does growth in dentistry mean to you? So as you think about your experience in the space and everything you've done to help dentistry, both the practices that you're coaching, the one that you manage, in your Facebook group, I'd love to hear your response to that question. What does growth in dentistry mean to you?
Okay, that's a great question. So, growth in dentistry. Okay. So, I would love to use myself as an example here. And that's going to be, I'll try to make this kind of a quick answer, but try to hit every note. And that is, when I first started in dental in 2002, I just needed a job. Like I had got married early, I had a child on the way, and so I needed a job quick. And I happened to fall into dental, right? I fell into dental. And the more I learned about dentistry, the more I grew attached to it and the more I wanted to become better at it. I didn't want to become a dentist. I never had an interest in becoming a dentist, but I did have an interest in the business side of dentistry and trying to figure out how to increase my confidence and my self-value. And one of the ways I did that was by really saying, I'm not just gonna do my 9 to 5 job and call it a day. Like I really want to grow here. So where can I grow in dentistry? Well, if I can learn the business side of dentistry, that seems to be an area where dentists care a lot about. So so I said I'm going to focus my, you know, I'm going to focus my attention on the business side and learn it really well and get really good at it. And I think anyone can do that. I think, I see a lot of times, you know, people in the group, some office managers are unhappy and they're not happy, or they have high expectations for, I should have got paid this, or I should have had this vacation time. Yes, listen, we all deserve something, but what you deserve is to increase your self value, and you have to do that by not just accepting what comes to you, but going out and getting more. And so that to me, I feel like the possibilities are endless in dentistry. Just because you're not a dentist, doesn't mean that you stay where you are. You can actually become a lot more in dental. There's just so many options out there. If you can really just, push yourself and say, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to settle for less. So,
I love that. Thank you, Kyle. And thank you for joining us today. Folks, this has been another episode of the Growth in Dentistry podcast. We're grateful for you coming week after week and engaging with us, and hope you continue to enjoy the content that we're putting out there. And as always, I'm Steve Jensen, your host. Keep growing.